All right, everybody. Thanks for joining today. I got Brian Herr here, who's going to be presenting here in just a couple minutes. We're going to give the attendees a few more minutes, probably 2 minutes to filter in, and then we'll get started. All right, Brian, I think we're ready to roll here. If you want to introduce yourself and we can get into the content.
Sure. More than happy to. Thank you, everyone, for joining. This is Brian Herr. This is a session that I would say that a lot of people, especially, directors, CIOs, CXOs, CISOs, this is the kind of session that makes great foundational content when you're talking to and thinking through your program of how to take what you have today to being CMMC compliant. It's a very hot topic right now, as the industry is expecting CMMC to become valid in 25. So early 25, we're thinking Q1. And many organizations have already started on the journey, but many are, as they're going through and getting prepared, are starting to understand the difference between self-assessment and the quality and rigor that goes with it versus what's going to be happening with a C3PA, a certified third-party assessor, and what that means. And those gaps are starting to come to light. There are some organizations that are also really starting to understand that in order to continue with their contract motion and their contract pipeline, what they had today may not make it. I mean, just from a CMMC compliance perspective. So they're really pushing into how do I get there to CMMC compliance in the most efficient, the most comprehensive way. And that's part of what we're going to talk through today. So we're going to talk through that a little bit more of a high level, getting into some of the brass tacks of what the environment and the process looks like. Now, one thing to keep in mind, the third session in this series is going to be a lot more technical. This session is meant to be a little bit more of the 5,000 to 7,000 foot view. The next session in the series, which I think is a few weeks out here, is very technical. It's going to get into a little bit more of basically walking through a use case and a build case of a CMMC environment, utilizing a full Microsoft CMMC ready stack. What does it look like? Really getting into the details of the architecture and the tools and the technologies. So that one's, a lot of people that are a little bit more on the technology side are excited about. This one is meant to be really talking through what are the big pieces that go into it, and understanding when we talk about what does it mean to have a CMMC ready environment. So let's really quick, for me, Brian Herr, for those of you that haven't met me before, I do quite a few speaking engagements. There's, especially in the areas of security, compliance, data privacy. I've been at this for a number of years, and what we found is that when talking with some of our partners, some of our upstream and downstream vendors, partners, are talking to our customers, this idea of understanding how all the pieces come together for a CMMC environment is something that's still a bit of a mystery. And that's part of what this session is going to work through. So let's go ahead and let's talk a little bit about what the pillars are around a CMMC program. I will tell you, I can always tell someone's background based on the questions they ask. Because if you really pull apart a CMMC program, there are three main pillars. One is the administrative processes, and this is the part that's often overlooked. And this is the people and the process and the policies and everything, everything that goes around what you're doing to administer a CMMC compliant security program. When people ask, like, what are some administrative processes? This is things like running and validating and monitoring background checks of individuals, making sure that all of their proper training is in place. They've done, for those, an example, their DoD training on handling of CUI, as everybody, passed their screening checks of, nationalities and et cetera, et cetera. It's the administrative side. Now, and I bring this up because a lot of times when people are doing their scores and looking at their program, sometimes they focus on one area. The technologists, they focus on the technology. Security people focus on security compliance, focus on compliance. Administrative sometimes gets lost in the wings. You have to look at all these pieces. When we're talking about the session today, we're going to be focusing more on the security and compliance technology, so everything around the technology side, but also how some of the tools and reporting help with basically reflecting back into the security and compliance program, because that program's around policies, both people policies, we're all used to policy and training checks, but also the policies you apply to platforms. Things like, protection platforms, Defender, policies you apply to how things perform to meet the NIST 800-171 controls. Also looking at things like security baselines and reporting of compliance against things like images and configuration and drift. We're going to get more into those bottom two pillars and in this session, so let's kind of keep with it. Don't forget the administrative processes. That's still part of this. But looking at all of these pieces coming together, in order to have a successful program, you have to start with a proven process. And for this, people are like, how do I get there? And they bring me a roadmap or a placemat of all the different technologies and operating systems and disparate vendors and platforms. And it is such a very diverse environment. It is no wonder why they're having trouble meeting their obligations, because it takes a lot of time and effort to build, manage, maintain, and most importantly, integrate a fleet of disparate tools, technologies, platforms, and providers. It takes a lot of time and effort. And Microsoft has done a great job of saying, we understand this problem. They took a step back and looked at, if they build an environment that already meets the requirements of FedRAMP, StateRAMP, we talk about joint observations. These are the organizations that are already working within the defense industrial base to do a joint observation with DoD and C3PAOs, and they're passing. Those that have done 800-171 inspections. Microsoft looked at their ecosystem between everything they provide in Azure Gov-Cloud, everything they're offering in Office 365 for Gov, right? This is the GCC high. You take all of that. They've done an excellent job of creating blueprints, guidance, integration stories. They've figured out how to make all of these things work to meet the requirements of FedRAMP, StateRAMP, and others. And because of that, because of the work they've already done, what they've shared, and the integration they have today, you have platforms that already have a FedRAMP authorization to operate. In other words, set up and configured in the way that they've designated using the platforms that have already been certified, you are most of the way there. I cannot stress that more than enough. It is very difficult to get all of these pieces to work together using disparate technologies and processes. You use an integrated platform that already has a FedRAMP authorization to operate. In other words, it's already passed certification for FedRAMP. We know it's passed other assessments, 800, 171, using a blueprint. So in other words, internal policies and build parameters already defined, creating this ready to go environment that's integrated, full coverage from security and compliance, already has integrated reportability. You know, we'll talk about this a little bit later on the Compliance Center and Sentinel. A lot of people look at Sentinel and they think it's only a security event tool. You know, that's what a SOC watch is. Sentinel does more. Sentinel has the ability with some of the workbooks to also do live dashboards of compliance. So looking at the data that Sentinel can see, giving real-time reporting to your compliance staff. That's, anytime I show these things to compliance teams, their mind's blown. They don't have this visibility historically. And the other thing that we really want to look at is Microsoft's done a great job. You have two avenues when it comes to hardening your images. You can use the images that are already hardened and available in the marketplace. They work today. You go to the marketplace, spin it up, and go. There are also tools available within the Microsoft ecosystem to build your own and manage and monitor config drift. There's a lot of ways to address that. It also allows you, if you want to use a third-party tool, you can do that as well. So some organizations very much utilize certain automation and config drift tools that are already authorized to work in this type of environment. No problem. Fantastic. It's what you're used to. Having all of this ready to go, proven process, proven architectures, these things already have been certified, it gives you a very fast start. The most key thing, though, to the success is having someone who understands the security and compliance side, as well as the technology and how to put all of it together to make sure it is following that proven process, setting the table for what a certified, a CMMC compliant environment looks like, and then helping you get your applications and users onboarded into that environment. That's very important. So I'm gonna take a step here. When I have this discussion with a lot of CIOs, what I found is when they're trying to do their CMMC journey today, most of it, you know, there's a little bit sprinkled in a couple of different clouds. Sometimes maybe there's some SaaS providers. Most of it's on-prem, at which point they are responsible for all 110 controls. Okay, and we'll get into that a little bit here, but that's a lot of work. That is making sure that everything around the environment meets the CMMC requirements and federal requirements around handling controlled unclassified information, so CUI or CUI. And you'll see there is a absolute benefit to a shared responsibility model. So this shared responsibility model, you look at it, this is a responsibility model between you and your service providers. Okay, if you use Microsoft Office 365 for Gov, so GCC High, as well as Azure Gov, and you use as much of the ready and authorized to operate tools and technologies that are available through the Microsoft ecosystem, right? They're already integrated. It's a consumption model, proven process, proven technology. The more of that you shift to a Microsoft responsibility, it's already handled. And you'll see that you have less work on your plate to become and maintain CMMC compliant. That's the value that comes with this model. Now, the other piece is you can shim in some additional service providers. So, you know, CoreTech, we're a service provider. Many times customers will really get into heavy Azure. They'll have a little bit of on-prem managed from Azure, which is a great way to extend the compliance and security capabilities of your Azure environment to your on-prem environment. And that's another thing to talk about. The idea is that your service provider is taking some more of that responsibility off of your lap, so that your teams have more time to focus on running the administrative side of the program, maybe more of the governance of the program, so that your CMMC compliance and your infrastructure that goes with it, between what Microsoft is providing and what you do with your CMMC ready service providers, you're now doing more of program management instead of IT security compliance management. And that's really how you accelerate getting yourself CMMC compliant and getting ready for that assessment. That's the one thing is right now in the industry, when we talk about it, a lot of people are going to be 18 to 24 months before they're really ready to do CMMC assessments and pass, because they're discovering the deficiencies that they have. And that's a problem when this starts to go live in early 25, right? You're going to start seeing the contracts require it. The big piece here is, let's look at the controls really quick. As you have all of this on your plate, moving more of this to the Microsoft responsibility. It's already been tested. They already have the authorization to operate. They've already been certified. These things work. And when we talk to people, it's like, I need to get there faster, Brian. How do I do this and lessen the impact to my organization and fully utilize what I'm doing within the Microsoft suite? The first thing we talk through is you want to deploy the full Azure suite, as well as Microsoft G365 E5 security plus compliance. And when we talk to people, if you look, this is a good template. This is something we can absolutely walk through. You're trying to get to the 110 score or CMMC compliance, right? Right now, everything's still 800, 171 based. By fully deploying Microsoft E5 and the full Azure tools as recommended by Microsoft, you can see blue is covered. In other words, it's covered for the environment within the Microsoft categories. Orange means it's partially covered. There's still something left on you, but if you look at it, there's not a lot of white. There's not a lot of things left on the table for you to manage. And most of those items, if you look at the controls, are more administrative. So I've seen organizations that had extremely poor scores. And once they took care of the administrative things, making sure that they had a POAM and they were screening their people, training their people, making sure their security plan was in place, getting the administrative things taken care of, by moving them to an environment that already had full Microsoft E5 with full Azure complement, built to the CMMC templates, managed by, built and managed by a partner who knows how to pull all the pieces together, and reporting, they can get to 110 score and they can maintain it. And a lot of the heavy lifting was done based on using the Microsoft ecosystem. So let's talk about that a little bit here. When we talk about the Microsoft ecosystem, the biggest thing I tell people is if you combine a fully utilized Azure Gov and GCC High Office 365 instance, it is a complete environment. Top to bottom, complete environment. And when this happens, it shortens your time to being able to deliver value. So it's not uncommon. Some organizations, they go through an exercise and discover really, we talked about this in the last session. What is the scope of CMMC? Does it need to be the whole company? Not necessarily. Maybe it's just a business unit or department. And this is where we go, well, you know what? If it needs to be that very succinct group, whether it's a business unit or a department, this is the perfect time to build a CMMC enclave. So it is a start to finish, ready to go CMMC environment built within Azure, built within, GCC High, so Office 365, turning on all the right features around access control, infrastructure security, compliance reporting, full detection and response. A lot of times in this environment, especially when it comes to having a SOC, that's one of the top talking points that we run into is having a SOC service that can work within a CMMC environment, utilizing the tools within the environment. That's very important. Working around how do we manage users, virtual desktops. The virtual desktops is often a very important point, especially when it comes to how these pieces fit together. How do we protect it? How do we put it all together? And then how do we do reportability? I have to report out to my compliance team, basically what needs to be addressed, what's drifted, what are the things that need to, is there any protections around data? So let's say I'm marking and monitoring the use of CUI. How do I handle threat and vulnerability management, patching, looking at things like compliance centers, the secure scores. One of the big areas that we often bring up is around Sentinel workbooks and dashboards. Very important. Now, this gives me a contained environment. That doesn't mean that you can't add to it. So basically, it's like I associate it with, a kind of a base model of a truck. So if someone, a lot of people are like, oh, if I have an F-150, right? If I'm looking at it saying, well, I have provided a CMMC ready F-150, and this is where the customer can add on. So let's say they want to, I'll use an example. Recently, we did one for an engineering firm, and we built the environment with virtual desktops that fit 3 models. One of them is for engineering. So these are CAD workstations, virtual, keeping all the data within the environment. The next one was administrative. So that's how they did their boundary, is they're doing, within virtual desktops, they have all their administrative people, all their, everything that goes with it. And then the last one was more of a bastion. So in other words, it's IT people working in the environment. It's kind of your 3 profiles of people using virtual desktops. And then they also managed some of the systems that connected to the environment. In other words, they had some people that were going out talking to customers, and they had to bring and be able to display CUI as part of those customer engagements. So those laptops got pulled in as part of the environment. In this case, we built the environment, we set everything up, and then the customer then starts to layer their processes and their technology on top, right? So their CAD systems, their design software. They have, case management software, ticket management software. They layered on top of that an ERP and project management software. Like you're starting to see what happens. You build the base, and then the customer is able to layer on top the very specific business processes, needs, and software that they're required to run their business. Because it's sitting in that envelope, you're keeping the data within the confines of that scope. In other words, you're keeping everything in that CMMC compliant bubble. It makes it a lot easier to protect, manage, and understand the flow of that data. And it also allows you, if you need to reach in or reach out of that environment. So it doesn't preclude you from having some on-prem components that come under the management of your Gov-Cloud.
So Brian, we have a question that I think is good to relate to this talk track, and it's how do we plan for bringing legacy systems and applications that aren't traditional good fits for the cloud into an environment like this? Can we do this in a hybrid model, in your experience?
Yeah, absolutely, we can do it. In fact, we have a couple projects right now where the manufacturing facility comes under, it has handling of CUI. And in this case, what ends up happening is we're working with that customer to apply CMMC controls to the manufacturing facilities. There's some warehousing facilities, things of that nature. So we're helping with that because there's an administrative construct here. The big thing was they had just a hodgepodge of tools and endpoint protection and patching and all these different things. One of the areas that we did was we said, listen, we've built this environment that has the tight controls, the good reporting, really gives you this construct, this platform for CMMC compliance. Let's remove the legacy products and services that you have on-prem. So we're still using the same servers. So they, not all their servers in their platforms are ready for image hardening. So a lot of people talk about it as, STIGs compliance. So for those of you not familiar, STIGs is basically a set of parameters that's been laid out about how to harden a operating system or software as dictated by, the federal government. And what you do is, for them, we said, okay, some of those, they're just not hardened. So you need to put it on your plan of action and milestones, your POAM. It's a risk. It's something you're going to have to fix over time if they can. Some of these things were legacy manufacturing machines. It's never going to be fixed. So you have to kind of work around it, and there's a process for that. But the idea is, for the things that worked, we took out the legacy endpoint and server protection. We moved it to Defender. So now all the reporting and compliance and patching, we used the the cloud connector from Microsoft, the Azure connector. So now we're managing all those on-prem systems from Azure. We're monitoring from Azure. We're protecting from Azure. The SOC is now able to see those systems using the Microsoft native tool. So now we've been able to extend the capabilities, security, and compliance of the CMMC environment, from a networking, perimeter security, like we extend it out. Now we keep it contained, right? You can't trust everything. But the idea is we've extended it out, and now we put it all into one platform. And it allows us to work with the customer and say, hey, let's understand what are the things that can be fixed, what are the things that aren't. We're now looking at a project to redeploy some of the on-prem servers or systems to be FIPS compliant, to be CMMC compliant, hardened, helping to use the standard set in the, what we'll call it, the core infrastructure now, the CMMC core infrastructure, and how it affects these other things. The other thing that was happening is some of these systems were put into other colos or third-party providers that were not CMMC and are not going to be CMMC certified. So in this case, because of the way the customer was looking at it, they thought, I'm providing enough of the controls, I can be CMMC compliant. Well, with some of the latest revisions, that's not how it's going to work. So what they're doing is they're migrating some of those pre-existing virtual machines that are built using sometimes older versions of STIG. Some of them just haven't been hardened yet, and it needs to be done. What they're doing is a migration, and they're basically moving those images, those systems over to a compliant environment. And as part of that, they're now enrolling them in Defender for Cloud. They're enrolling them in Purview. They're enrolling them in a compliance dashboards and programs. And so basically moving these systems that have been built and managed elsewhere into an environment that's already set to a higher standard. There's a certain amount of up leveling that happens with that. Now, it doesn't magically sprinkle CMMC compliance dust on them. It's not how this works. What ends up happening is you still have to have a plan to either migrate them to a compliant image and get them enrolled in what your new standard looks like from a server setup, or there's a certain point of, I will never be able to change this. I have to put it in my plan of action and milestones that it's always going to exist. And then you secure around it. And depending on the agency, you might have to get some special considerations. But once you have that core nucleus of a CMMC ready environment, extending out or extending the capabilities and benefits into existing legacy environments or migrating things in from non-compliant to compliant, all of those have a definite impact to your score and your overall security and compliance. I know it's a long trip, but this is what I'm seeing in the industry. Does that help, Colin?
Yeah, I think it does. I think the other thing that was kind of followed up on is, can the reporting be extended to an environment, through the native Microsoft tool sets, if it doesn't necessarily live in a Gov-Cloud environment? I think you answered that.
Yeah,
but
100%.
yeah,
That's the one thing I make sure I explain to people is Microsoft has moved from being a niche player to being a complete ecosystem. If you really pull the whole thing apart, they're a complete environment and they can reach into other environments. I have some customers that also do some things within AWS Gov-Cloud. And when it comes to some of the security and compliance side, they're managing it from their Azure platform. Those pieces of it, because then they have a central pane of glass for their SOC. They have a central pane of glass for their compliance people. And that's a huge benefit. As I mentioned before, a lot of times the program killers are the fact of you have a mishmash of disparate platforms, tools, reporting, dashboards. Like, it's just too much to manage, especially with smaller teams. This gives you one ecosystem, one pane of glass, and one place for your teams and your service providers to operate from. Having that ready to go, it's a game changer.
Yep. And then another question came in is, in our experience in kind of migrating folks to these type of kind of, I don't want to say ready-made, but CMMC compliant templated environments, have we seen any business challenges and hindrances for these controls on their ability to do what the applications need to do, given all of the hardening and things that need to happen, and how do we mitigate that risk? Not necessarily from a compliance perspective, but from a business operations perspective.
Oh, that's a great one. So yeah, we do sometimes run into issues, and it has more to do with less the environment, more the hardening of the operating system. Yeah, this is something that's not an uncommon discussion. If an environment has been previously running on unhardened operating systems, like server operating systems, as you go through and harden it to meet STIG's requirements, especially if you're using older software or very specialized software, you can sometimes break it because you just end up with a conflict. Maybe there's a feature, functionality, maybe there's something that's in use that an unhardened system has allowed, but a hardened system turns off for security reasons. It can break. So when I see an environment where people say, I got these applications and they're really old, or I got these very specialized applications, the first thing we say is, one of the best things that you can do is have the environment stood up, have a hardened OS, install and test. A lot of times, if you install the latest versions of that software on top of a hardened system, it will flush out if there's any issues very quickly. And a lot of times, if some piece of that hardening needs to be backed out, you can figure out pretty quick. What I see people try to do is they'll move over a really old, a previous server image that's been running forever. It's got the software on there, and then they'll try to harden it a little at a time, little at a time, little at a time, little at a time. It takes forever. They never get done, and they often break the application lots of times. So when we talk to people, it's like, listen, let's stand up these servers and let's do a full migration from your old server, VMs to the new server VMs. Let's do some testing of the apps. A lot of times laying it on top and then having some time that if we maybe need to back out a tweak or two on the hardening, which doesn't always happen. It happens once in a while. It's much faster and you have higher success rate because then at least you've tested it, looks good, everything runs, you do one cut over and you move on. Death by 1,000 paper cuts as part of a hardening and or migration. Your user base, your business users, the organization at large will grow very tired of the constant interruption. So you have to be very mindful as you build an environment, take what are the strategic things, lift and shift your apps and data where you can, land it, test it, and then do a cutover. Very smooth. Be very strategic in what things come over as is, and be very realistic that the things that, I kind of equate it to sometimes when we move houses, apartment to house, what have you, there's a couple of boxes that come with you. And darn well the things in the boxes don't work in the new space. So you have to make some decisions. You look in there and maybe it's lamps or what have you, some kind of decor that doesn't go with what you have now. You have to make a decision. Do I try to make it work? Do I pull this box apart over time? Or do I just bite the bullet and go, yep, no, I'm going to build net new over here. I'm going to get new picture frames that match match in the house, and these are going to just get cast away, right? Donated, set aside, whatever. And that's the reality of it.
Yep. All right, thanks for that. I think we can move on.
Right. So detection and response. This one, here's what I will tell you, and we talked a little bit about this. When it comes to Microsoft's detection and response, there's Sentinel at the center of it and log analytics. So log analytics collects all the data and then makes it available so that Sentinel can look at it and act upon it. And that's the most important thing. It's acting upon it. It allows your security operations center to look for alerts, anomalous behavior, act on the environment, things of that nature. And a lot of people are like, well, Sentinel is really designed for the Microsoft ecosystem. I'll agree, but that's only part of the story. We at CoreTech, we work we're a security operations center, and we do integrate with other platforms, other cloud providers, your hyperscalers. We have customers maybe within the environment, they're using Palo Alto or other firewalls in their CMMC environment. They're using all their OSs. The reality is all of it does hook together into Sentinel, and Sentinel really gives a couple of different things. One, Sentinel allows your SOC to operate. They can look at cases, they can look at alerts, they can tune, they can do response automation. It brings all the data in from all the defenders for everything. You can also bring in third-party alerts from other connectors. Some people are using Palo Alto XDR, maybe they're using F5 endpoint protection. Instead of using the Microsoft load balancers, maybe they're using F5 load balancers. At the end of the day, some people do bring, we'll call it, some companion technology into the environment because maybe they like something better. We'll use firewalls as an example. Palo Alto's. It's not uncommon. For some CMMC environments, maybe they don't want to use the Microsoft Advanced Firewall. They're more comfortable with Palo Alto. No problem. We as a provider and partner often deploy preferred platforms. For us, it's going to be the Microsoft or Palo Alto platforms. We'll deploy the platform. We'll hook it into Sentinel. We'll hook it into log analytics, so all the logs and alerts go there so that your SOC can see it. It's all integrated. And then because of how expansive Microsoft's connectors are for Sentinel and log analytics, there's a lot of native integrations, like hundreds, and it continues to grow. And then, there's always the standby, the tried and true, which is a syslog collector that works today. The other thing that I find very interesting is because of where Sentinel sits, it has a lot of viewability into what's actioning in the environment. And there's a lot that Microsoft has built on top of that and reaching your CMMC compliance by utilizing that visibility and actionability within Sentinel. But go ahead.
Yeah, so we got a question that I think is geared towards a log analytics and security monitoring SIM tool, but I'm thinking you can tie it back to any third-party technology that you might integrate to this environment, but maybe start with, if they don't want to use Sentinel or there's already a SIM in place that they believe is compliant with the CMMC controls but doesn't have an ATO. Is that a risk? and maybe extend that out to, I'm pretty sure Palo has an ATO, but maybe another firewall like at Fortinet's not on the ATO list. Can you still use it if you map its configurations to the CMMC controls?
So that comes under a solid, it depends. So the basically, if no matter what in an environment that has CUI, like there are certain things that have to be in place from a technology compliance. When I say technology compliance, there's certain things, configuration, the technology can't come from certain countries. It must utilize certain, FIPS requirements around encryption. Can you do it? Yes, it requires unpacking whatever the third-party tool is, maybe working with the C3PAO or working with that vendor to unpack what all the components are and seeing if it does meet the requirements of working in an environment that has controlled unclassified information. What I found is you may have to do that, and sometimes you win and sometimes you don't. You may come back with something that doesn't match. Now you're finding alternate products. This is why when I tell people, like, look at what are your requirements of an environment, like what are the things I need to accomplish, and where can I use tools, platforms, software, applications, processes, services that already meet the requirements. It will dramatically drop the amount of overhead and work that is required to not only get CMMC certified, but to maintain it. The other thing that becomes very actionable is the more you're it's a lot of times way faster to migrate to a platform or software or service that already has a federal authorization to operate. In other words, it's ready to go, than it is to try to go through the process of getting a software or platform or vendor through the whole process of figuring out whether they can work in the environment. And some vendors, they just don't want to. They will flat out tell you, we work in the commercial space. This is what we're going to do. We're not a good fit. And the time to figure that out is not when you're in your deployment schedule. So that's why we guide people to, you need to be looking at what are my outcomes, what are the things I need to do, and where can I use the native platforms that already have an authorization to operate? What are the things that are ready to go?
Awesome. I think the theme of this presentation is anything, Azure Gov as a service pretty much checks that box. So yeah. I think the last thing we want to touch on is the reporting elements to map the infrastructure to the compliance requirements.
Yeah. So what I'll tell you is this is probably this and some of the Sentinel dashboards around compliance. These are the things that when I show it to people in the seat of being responsible for the technology compliance to CMMC, this is jaw-dropping. They don't get a lot of this visibility from other platforms, and this is part of it. This comes with what you're doing within the Microsoft suite. Microsoft has absolutely dialed this in. They know how to get you CMMC compliant. They built the platforms to get you there. Everything is ready to go. The biggest thing is getting someone to help you put all the pieces together in the right way and to help you manage it long term. And you will be successful. And the tools are here to help you report on it. I mean, I've been on calls where I show people this, like this is, we've built an environment for them, and we go through and we're showing them real time, and they're just like amazed, because not only does it tell you what's compliant, it tells you what's out of compliant, and you can drill into it. You can also modify. So if there maybe something is handled by a third party, let's say there's controls on here that are around firewalls, but you're using Palo Alto, you can exclude, you can move things out. We know environments change with time. That's the whole idea of baseline and configuration tracking. So that the idea that you can have a non-technologist be able to readily walk through based on the controls, right? And that's a different mindset. This is a non-technologist walking through the environment based on the controls and being able to understand what is the status of compliance and what needs to be fixed, and validating something that was fixed is really fixed. That's huge. So the last piece here, and I hit on this a little bit earlier, the Compliance Center gives you what I would say is the taking a look at the environment against your controls. So it's going to tell me if there's servers that are maybe out of whack or a baseline out of whack. The Sentinel workbooks are acting on actionable data. In other words, they're looking at data coming through the environment and giving me a different set of view. This is not your compliance person as much as your security practitioner thinking in the mode of CMMC. And this is different. When I show this to security people with a compliance mindset, which is different than someone who's managing compliance. Compliance people, they're looking at controls and meeting those controls. Security people that are compliance minded, they're looking at the functioning of the controls. They want to understand that the things that are happening in the environment, real time or near time, are meeting the controls. They're not askew with the controls. They're not alerting against the controls. This is a different visibility. I don't know of many platforms that give this visibility. And if you really are looking at managing your CMMC program and not having surprises, the inherent capabilities built into these platforms will take you leaps beyond what everyone's trying to do through spreadsheets and cobbled together platforms. So if you want to get to the next generation of an environment, still being able to meet some of your requirements and fulfill some of the legacy items that come with it, like no environment's completely clean, and having that visibility and actionability, having this ecosystem put together in a CMMC compliant way, having the reporting and these dashboards, this is different. This is very different. And people who, once they get used to this, will never go back.
Awesome. So there's two more questions here around device hardening, and I think one will be firmly addressed in kind of the technical deep dive and use case walkthrough in the next session. But one of them I think does apply just at the high level that this presentation's at. And, it's if we do have to pull one of the STIGs hardening elements out, as you mentioned, how does that impact our ability to achieve compliance, and how can we manage the POAM to achieve that compliance while still maybe being without a couple hardening controls that are on the roadmap?
So this gets into more of the call it the thought and process of a POAM. The reality is there is no perfect system. There is no perfect configuration. Now, that breaks the brains of some auditors. I will tell you that right now. Like, oh my God, everything is going to be perfect. These controls are infallible, and in controls we trust. That's not how this works. If you actually deep dive into the whole idea of the program and the controls, there is some leniency. There are some things that are going to have to be accepted risks, and you have to basically secure around those risks. You have to have compensating controls, and you have to monitor the functionality. So in other words, I'll bring an example from earlier. So let's say I have a machine on the manufacturing floor, and one, it's never been hardened to STIG. It will never be hardened to STIG because at the end of the day, let's say it's an extruder, right? It's a manufacturing device, has an older operating system, and you cannot harden it. But you need it to extrude parts used on military vehicles, right? I don't have a dichotomy. If I can't harden it, does it mean I can't use it and now these military vehicles can't get these parts? No, that's not the intent. It's, okay, I cannot meet STIG, or maybe I'm meeting a threshold of STIG. right? So let's say I'm gonna take the extreme case. I can't do anything with STIG. Then I'm going to secure around it. I'm going to add some visibility. I'm going to put it in my plan of action and milestones. I'm going to note it as a risk, put in there what are the compensating controls. Maybe I've got Defender for IoT. So I have Defender sitting around it because it's an IoT device or an OT device sitting around it. I have put it behind a firewall in its own segment. I've done things to make sure that it is cordoned off. I know the risk exists. I've done everything that I can to address it, and I'm watching it. So that is solved, but you can't forget about it. The other one is, let's say I do need to pull a few things out. We've run into this recently with some engineering workstations. In that case, what ends up happening is we note what got pulled out, and the customer writes an exception, and then we talk about how we put in the documentation that they hold in their program. What are the compensating controls? What are the things we did to compensate for removing those? I think it was like 4 items that they needed removed to be able to use a virtual desktop with their engineering software. So they understood the risks, they accepted the risks, we put together a program to work around the risks. In this case, we made some changes to the Defender profile to basically look for or address whatever those hardenings were supposed to be. So instead of doing it in the STIG's config and of the image, we did it at a different layer using Defender policies. Does that help, Colin?
Yeah, it makes sense to me. Unfortunately, our attendees can't ask questions live, but I don't see anything else in there. So Brian, I don't know if you have any other closing thoughts or want to sum it up before we hop off here.
Yeah, the biggest thing I would say is a takeaway. The path to success is to simplify the environment and utilize a comprehensive, cohesive platform around security, compliance, data privacy, cloud users, how you interact and interoperate with users. Microsoft does have a platform, but this is different in that you can provide a complete infrastructure with needing very minimal things from outside within the Microsoft ecosystem that's already integrated, secured, and already meets the requirements of federal mandates. Being able to work within that parameter, provide a best-in-class and a really optimized environment for your business, this is what's going to be propelling the industry forward, where you will be able to meet CMMC requirements, but you're also going to be moving forward and meeting your business requirements without having to dramatically change your world.
Absolutely. And I think we'd be remiss not to say that CoreTech has a wealth of experience both with our customers and with resources that work for us that have deployed these environments in past operational roles, with customers that, have been on this compliance roadmap. So, the technology is one thing, understanding how it fits and deploying it to meet the business needs and objectives of the federal government is a tall task. Can be simplified with the Microsoft platform, but we definitely know how to accelerate and simplify the journey to get there. So we really hope this was helpful for everybody, and looking forward to the final webinar in the series where we'll take a very technical deep dive into a sample use case of an environment and how we take it from start to finish to get to this level of compliance and operational readiness. So thanks, everybody. Hope you have a good day. Hope that this was helpful, and let us know if you have any questions. We're happy to engage as needed as you're considering CMMC.